Hello, folks. Welcome to my channel, Resource Paradise. Before I get started, can I please have you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you will get my latest videos when they come out. All right, let's get started. Today, I want to do a comparison between the US and Europe in regards to inflation, homelessness, and crime. The reason I choose to discuss this topic is to let viewers know there are other alternatives, such as places you could go to if you feel uncomfortable in the current environment you are in. Most people see what's happening in their country and they feel cornered. Maybe they were born in their country or whatever, and they don't know where else to go. You see, if the environment you are in is not satisfactory to you, just go somewhere you feel more at ease. Ask the migrants crossing the borders in the US. While that's bad, the point is they are getting out of an unpleasant environment into one with the hopes it will provide better opportunity as well as peace. But before you decide on what you want to do, I will give you information that you might be able to uh, do with whatever you want to do with it. Let us begin. Homelessness, crime, and inflation are interrelated problems that have a big impact on the socio-economic environments of both Europe and the US. Recent patterns show that these problems appear differently in every region due to differences in cultural perspectives, economic policies, and societal reactions to crisis. The state of the global economy, consumer demand, and monetary policy are some of the factors that affect inflation in the US. By adjusting interest rates and using other monetary tools, the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, is able to control inflation. The United States has gone through significant periods of inflation, including the oil crisis of the 1970s, and more recently, because of the supply chain interruptions and stimulus measures implemented in response to the pandemic, as demonstrated by the recent interest rate hikes to combat inflation that spiked during the COVID-19 pandemic recovery phase. The American approach to inflation has a tendency to be more reactive, with policies changing quickly to control sudden spikes. The European Central Bank, or ECB, oversees Europe's inflation for the nation that make up the Eurozone. Nations outside the Eurozone, such as the UK and Switzerland, are in charge of their own monetary policies. Because of a combination of more cautious monetary policies, a stronger emphasis on social safety nets, and more regulated markets, European inflation trends are frequently more stable. But Europe has experienced inflationary pressures akin to those in the United States, especially in light of the energy crisis that followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Although other European nations have also raised interest rates, the strategy is typically more coordinated within the Eurozone, and structural variations in the economy, such as more powerful labor unions and distinct wage setting mechanisms, often resulted in less volatile inflation. Number one, inflation trends. In light of recent global economic disruptions like the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian Ukrainian war, inflation rates in Europe and the US have changed. They are differently. The European Union's inflation rate as of December 2023 was 3.4%, with notable differences among member states. For example, Czechia had an inflation rate of 7.6%, while Belgium's rate was only 0.5%. In contrast, the United States saw a more dramatic rise in inflation, reaching a peak of over 9% in June 2022 before declining to about 3% by the summer of 2023, mostly as a result of the Federal Reserve aggressive monetary policy. Demand pull factors resulting from post pandemic consumer spending and wage inflation driven by labor shortages have been main drivers of inflation in the United States. On the other hand, cost push factors, in particular rising energy prices made worse by geopolitical tensions, have had a greater impact on inflation in Europe. Another important distinction is exemplified by the various approaches adopted by central banks in reaction to these inflationary pressures. The US Federal Reserve has raised interest rates more aggressively than the European Central Bank. In an effort to quickly reduce inflation, the Federal Reserve has adopted a more aggressive monetary tightening strategy. Dynamics of homelessness, number two. While there is still a great deal of concern about homelessness in both Europe and the US, there are notable differences in the root causes and strategies for solving the issue. More than 580,000 Americans became homeless in 2022. This number has been linked to growing rental costs and stagnant incomes. In economically deprived areas where housing costs are rising, the most striking increases in homelessness are observed. On the other hand, governments throughout Europe have committed to implementing strategies similar to Finland's successful housing first model, which significantly reduced homelessness by providing permanent housing solutions. Following crises like the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, many countries are facing challenges related to the commodification of housing and increased demand as a result of population shifts. In an effort to combat homelessness, the European Union has also started initiatives placing a strong emphasis on member state cooperation in the implementation of successful policies. The varying reactions from society highlight how differently homelessness is addressed. European countries generally support national strategies that integrate services and prioritize long term housing solutions, whereas the United States tend to operate a more fragmented system with many local initiatives frequently competing for limited funding. Number three, comparison of crime rates. Comparing the United States and Europe can also be done via the prism of crime. In the past, the United States has had greater rates of violent and property crime than Europe. In sharp contrast to Europe, where there are fewer than two homicides per 100,000 people, the United States has continually reported homicide rates between 7.9 and 10.5 per 100,000. On the other hand, new patterns suggest that crime rates in Europe are changing. Europe has seen a marked increase in crime over the past 10 years, especially in relation to crimes like sexual assault and property crimes. For instance, robberies increased by 9.7% in 2022, but thefts in the U, Euro- in U, but theft in EU increased by 17.9%. These increasing figures show that many European communities are becoming increasingly concerned about public safety. Socioeconomic factors that disproportionately affect low income communities, such as poverty and racial inequality, compound crime in the United States by increasing crime rates and perpetuating cycles of recidivism and incarceration. In this sense, effectively combating crime in the United States requires addressing underlying social issues. Number four, economic and social policies. Different social and economic policies in both regions influence efforts to reduce homelessness, inflation, and crime. The federal government of the United States has provided a significant amount of funding to fight homelessness, such as the $5.6 billion that HUD announced for community programs. However, when compared to many European nations, where strong welfare systems are frequently in place to assist vulnerable populations, social safety nets in the United States continue to be less developed. Social policies in Europe typically place a higher priority on universal healthcare, affordable housing, and safety nets, which has an impact on low income groups' economic outcomes. In countries like Austria, where the percentage of social housing is higher than in the United States, there is a clear emphasis on investing in social infrastructure. While governments in Europe have mobilized price caps and subsidies, as well as other fiscal measures to protect housing from inflation, The United States has mostly relied on monetary intervention that might not directly address the underlying causes of economic problems. Number five, in summary, in the end, even though the US and Europe have similar patterns, problems with inflations, homelessness, and crime, their responses are determined by different socio-economic frameworks and policy strategies. In the US, inflation has been driven by demand, whereas in Europe, inflation is cost push and mostly influenced by outside shocks. While the US struggles with service fragmentation, European approaches to reducing homelessness are more comprehensive. Last but not least, there are notable differences that impact community safety and the efficacy of policies, as demonstrated by crime rates and underlying social issues. This comparative analysis emphasizes the need for customized approaches that take into account the unique circumstances of each location with the ultimate goal of fostering healthier, more just societies in both Europe and the US. All right, folks, that's all for today. Until next time, thank you for watching.